This is the music, right? Come on, put it back. Yeah, yeah. Happening. Dan bantu. Ladies and gentlemen, we shall be commencing very soon, so please grab your coffee and seats as the event will begin shortly. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome everyone and thank you so much for joining us today. My name is YBhg and I'm from Tenaga Nasional Berhad, the host of today's Energy Sector Roundtable Engagement number 2 on the topic of low carbon mobility. Now, on behalf of Tenaga Nasional Berhad, we are glad that you can spend time with us today as we are continuing with the series of roundtable conversations on the energy sector. Of course, this series of roundtable conversations was only made possible via the collaboration between Climate Governance Malaysia and the CEO Action Network. And as such, allow me the privilege to invite Datin Sri Sunita Rajakumar, the founding chairperson of Climate Governance Malaysia and steering committee member of CEO Action Network, to kick things off with a few words. Datin Sri, if you may.
Thank you, Woon. A very warm welcome to our esteemed contributors and all our distinguished participants today. My name is Sunita, and for those who don't know us, I would like to make a quick introduction to Climate Governance Malaysia and the CEO Action Network. Climate Governance Malaysia is the Malaysian chapter of the World Economic Forum's Climate Governance Initiative. It was founded in 2019 and comprises non-executive directors from leading enterprises in Malaysia. The CEO Action Network is a network of CEOs representing around 45 leading companies across 20 priority sectors in Malaysia, working to address the issue of increased sustainability ambitions. Businesses are the leading emitters of greenhouse gas emissions around the world, and this series of roundtable engagements with key government ministries and civil society is the private sector trying to play our part. And more specifically, this initiative is being led by directors and CEOs. Collectively, our focus is on making sure that companies play their part in increasing their climate and sustainability ambitions. companies can make a huge difference in the fight against the triple crisis of climate change, biodiversity, and pollution. So both CAN and CGM are organizing this series of roundtables across three main sectors: energy and transport, plantations, and the circular economy. Ladies and gentlemen and friends, CAN and CGM are really honored to have you with us today. We all have a common goal in moving our industry forward on climate action. To be really effective in moving the needle, we need clear and predictable government policy. In today's session, we hope to get feedback and ideas on high impact areas in the area of low carbon mobility that can significantly lower our sector's carbon impact and get us on the road to net zero. Out of this, CAN and CGM will prepare a report to the government suggesting how we could collectively contribute towards more ambitious mitigation and adaptation efforts in light of the climate emergency. And this report will be timed to be submitted in the run-up to November's COP26 conference in Glasgow. More generally, we want to play our part in building a whole of society, all of government engagement between stakeholders. For today, we are especially pleased to have the support and involvement of Puan Normah Osman, Deputy Secretary General, Ministry of Transport, who will be delivering the keynote address. Thank you so much, Puan. We are also very grateful to Datuk Fazlur Rahman Zainuddin, Tenaga Nasional Berhad, for agreeing to be a keynote speaker as well. Thank you, Datuk. The conversation will be skillfully moderated by Encik Ahmad Hadri Haris from Shell Malaysia. Thank you, Hadri. And aside from Datuk Fazlur, the other panelists will be Encik Huzaimi Noor bin Omar, Director Low Carbon Mobility at MGTC, Datuk Madani Sahari, CEO of MARI, Datuk Aisyah Hamad, President Malaysian Automotive Association, Datuk Sharul Hilmi, President of Malaysian EV Owners Club. I would also like to thank Petronas, Tenaga and Shell for organizing this series of roundtables for the energy sector. We would not have been able to do this without you. I am very confident that with the excellent panelists we have with us and with your inputs, we will have a rich exchange of ideas today. We thank you all for investing your time with us today. Back to you, Woon.
Thank you, Datuk Sri, for that insightful prelude to today's event. Now, before we continue further with today's agenda, let us run a short poll to get your feedback on whether you think our country is doing enough to spur low carbon mobility adoption, namely transportation modalities with reduced carbon footprints, such as electric vehicles. Now, you should be able to see the poll appearing in your WebEx client. In addition, should you have any questions or comments that you would like to pose to our speakers and panelists, feel free to put them in the Q&A section. Now, rest assured that your input can be seen and heard by all our honored guests this afternoon. So do submit your questions. Now, with this being a discussion on low carbon mobility, I would venture that most of us here would probably think we can do more, but let us see how it goes. Shall we have a look at the results of the survey? Can we have the results, please? There you go. Okay, as you can see, the majority of us believe that we can definitely do much more in the country on low carbon mobility. And hopefully today's conversation will go a long way towards achieving that. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, we indeed, as mentioned by Datin Sri Sunita earlier, we have an exciting lineup of speakers that will be gracing the stage next, beginning with YBhg Datuk Fazlur Rahman Zainuddin, Chief Strategy and Ventures Officer of Tenaga Nasional Berhad, and followed by our honored guest today, the Deputy Secretary General Policy from Ministry of Transport, Yang Berusa Puan Normah Osman. And so without further ado, let us welcome Datuk Fazlur to kick things off with his welcome note. Datuk, over to you.
Thank you very much, Weekend, for the introduction. Assalamualaikum and a good day to everybody. First and foremost, I would like to extend my sincere appreciation to our honored guests today, the Deputy Secretary General Policy from the Ministry of Transport, Yang Berusaha, Puan Normah Osman. Thank you very much for taking the time to join us today for the second CEO Action Network Energy Sector Roundtable, focusing on the topic of low carbon mobility. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the second of a series of 5 roundtable discussions on the energy sector, aimed at discussing whether Malaysia can achieve net zero emissions by 2050. The first energy sector roundtable, conducted 2 weeks ago, discussed a pathway to a carbon neutral Malaysia. Without doubt, the energy sector plays a critical role in making carbon neutrality happen in Malaysia. However, one of the key takeaways for me from the first roundtable was carbon neutrality is not something that can be accomplished solely through decarbonization of the energy sector. Rather, it is a complex system that will require the decarbonization of various other sectors, and one that will require a whole of government and whole of society approach to happen. Indeed, sustainability is now an agenda on many CEOs' lists. Hence, this series of roundtable discussions organized by CAN alongside Climate Governance Malaysia is part of our efforts to address and solicit feedback from critical climate sustainability concerns in Malaysia. As such, it is our hope that the discourses that we'll be having today and over the next few weeks will succeed in raising awareness of the urgent need to tackle climate change and seed ideas for action and policies to drive our national climate ambition. Ladies and gentlemen, I believe that all of us here acknowledge the fact that our world is gradually changing from the effects of climate change. The impact of climate change may appear subtle at the beginning, but as global temperatures rise, these results in ecosystem shifts such as rising sea levels, increasing abnormal weather phenomenon like floods, storms, and droughts. If left unchecked, the results over time can be devastating, with the risk of ecological disasters creating havoc on our Earth's biodiversity, water and food supply, society and health systems, and the economy. Of course, I'm not here today to be the prophet of doom and gloom. Clearly, the world has recognized the threat of climate change, and governments all over the world have realized that there is an imperative for all nations to band together to combat climate change. The Paris Agreement was a historic demonstration of almost all countries' collective commitment to address climate change, and there are huge expectations for the next COP26 in Glasgow this November 2021 to further strengthen our commitments to climate action. In line with the climate change efforts of the governments of the world, businesses too are facing increasing pressure to do their part to demonstrate their support and leadership in decarbonizing their respective organizations and industries. Tenaga Nasional Berhad is no exception. As the #1 electric utility in Malaysia, TNB is expected by many of our stakeholders to take on a pivotal role in the decarbonization of the Malaysian energy sector while demonstrating leadership in sustainability commitments. We fully subscribe to the need to ensure environmental sustainability in the provision of electricity to combat climate change as the first part of our energy trilemma. At the same time, we must also ensure that the other 2 aspects of the energy trilemma are being considered, namely the need for energy security and social equity. For a developing country like Malaysia, social equity is focused on affordability and access to energy. It is against this backdrop that TNB is developing our sustainability pathway. Balancing all this is not easy, but our teams are inspired and very much looking forward to announcing the details of this in the coming months, as indicated by our CEO in an interview recently. In the meantime, TNB has not been idle in implementing measures to bring down its GHG footprint. We aim to achieve 8.3 gigawatts of domestic and international renewable energy assets by 2025, including 2.5 gigawatts large-scale hydro capacity. We also have been shortlisted for a 50 megawatt large-scale solar project in Bukit Selambau, Kedah, bringing our total LSS to 130 megawatts. Additionally, we have secured a total rooftop solar capacity of 85 megawatts through our subsidiary G-Sparks. In our electricity networks, we are investing in smart grid technologies that will enable the adoption of more distributed RE, including smart meters and digitalization. For the customers, we have established platforms to encourage renewable energy supply and trading. These comprise the My Green Plus that is facilitated by the Malaysian Green Attribute Tracking System, which enables customers to purchase RE certificates from renewable energy sources. Despite our efforts, the energy sector, and in particular electricity and heat production, remains as the #1 contributor of CO2 emissions in Malaysia. It is therefore unsurprising that a lot of attention has been paid on decarbonization of the energy sector. The government, through KETSA, has already released the Energy Transition Plan 2021 to 2040, which states that the country will be raising its installed capacity of renewable energy to 40% by 2035. This, along with the gradual reduction of coal generation, is expected to significantly reduce the amount of CO2 emissions arising from electricity production. We believe that while it is crucial that the energy sector is gradually decarbonized, it is merely a piece of the jigsaw puzzle that constitutes our nation's decarbonization efforts. Similar efforts and measures must also be in place for other sectors, and most notably the transport sector. Based on the numbers obtained from Malaysia's third biennial update report to the UNFCCC, electricity and heat production remains as the largest contributor of CO2 emissions at 103,000 gigagrams CO2, representing around 39% of Malaysia's CO2 emissions. This is followed closely by road transport, which contributed around 55,000 gigagrams CO2, accounting for 21% of Malaysia's total CO2 emissions in 2016. It is therefore crucial for the transport sector to decarbonize, as this addresses the societal shift on the demand side of the energy transition. Just as our country's electricity generation supply side is gradually being decarbonized and more REs introduced into our generation mix, a transition to electric vehicles needs to take place in Malaysia sooner rather than later, particularly to capitalize on progress and synergies in storage technologies, which has both EV and grid applications. Electric vehicles, and particularly battery electric vehicles, have zero tailpipe emissions, and hence putting more BEVs on Malaysian roads in place of internal combustion engine vehicles will contribute significantly towards the reduction of our nation's overall GHG emissions. We also believe that electrification of mobility is an economic game changer for Malaysia, as new technology will certainly stimulate higher value economic activity within our ecosystem. At the same time, transitioning to electric vehicles will also bring about other economic and health benefits, including reduced urban air pollution and the accompanying reduction of health costs arising from it. Our subsidiary, TME Research and YBhg, together with MGTC, UKM, YBhg, conducted a study this year on the environmental and health benefits of EV adoption. This study found that the reduction of both nitrogen oxides and sulfur dioxides that results from the elimination of tailpipe emissions with EVs can potentially help avoid health costs per year to the tune of 9.1 billion ringgit. The same study also established that the life cycle GHG emissions for BEVs, or battery EVs, that run solely on battery source electric power is around 23% lower than internal combustion engine or ICE vehicles, even under the current Malaysian grid generation mix, taking into account the generation plans up to 2040 under JPET 2020. As such, ladies and gentlemen, we believe that it is important for Malaysia to start looking seriously into accelerating the transition into low carbon mobility, especially BEVs. TNB is prepared to lead this exciting transition, not only as an infrastructure provider, but to drive a collaborative approach with a coalition of stakeholders to realize this important step towards decarbonization. As it stands, we see several major barriers hindering the adoption of EVs in Malaysia, including the lack of public EV charging infrastructure. As the electricity provider, TNB has been approached by the industry players with regards to the EV charging infrastructure. Together with MGTC, TNB has put up 73 charging stations in 31 locations by 2020 to understand the needs and expectations better. We are certainly learning new things in the process, and also from many of you, and we aim to build upon this learning. There have been several encouraging signs of private sector investment into Malaysian public EV infrastructure of late, including the planned build-up of several DC fast chargers along our Malaysian roads. Of course, it is important for any business making such investments to ensure that the infrastructure will be reasonably utilized to avoid them becoming stranded assets. For TNB, we have been exploring several business models to drive up the foundational support for EV adoption in Malaysia. We believe by working with like-minded partners, we can build a strong foundation to encourage more acceptance of low-carbon mobility. Our recent MOU with DHL Express Malaysia is one such partnership, as they have a long-term vision to achieve net zero carbon emission goals. And TNB is helping them to advance the electrification of their fleet in several years' time. This MOU is our initial step to support the EV ecosystem by working with other partners down the value chain of the EV ecosystem. This milestone testifies to what our CEO, Datuk Bahrain, shared recently in The Age, that TNB is ever willing to provide the necessary EV infrastructure across the nation, and that we are very serious on the EV front. To this end, we have set up a project management office to drive the EV agenda and to look forward to making strong strides forward along with our partners on this path. This is where we believe the government can play an important role in fostering an ecosystem for the industry to increase EV adoption by providing a clear pathway for Malaysia to transition to low-carbon mobility through clear and bold industry and rakyat-friendly policies. The news of a low-carbon mobility pathway will provide a strong signal to the private sector, industry, and consumers. This signaling is important to provide confidence and guide the necessary investments and plans to transform and capitalize on the inevitable electrification of mobility. On this note, Tenaga Nasional Berhad is keen to work with any private sector party that wants to transition to electric mobility, and at the same time, step up on multi-ministerial engagements to flesh out Malaysia's low-carbon mobility plans. To end my welcome note this afternoon, I would like to put forward my hope for today's session, namely for the discourse that we will be having in a short while to be a cradle for great ideas and suggestions to take Malaysia's low-carbon mobility scene forward. Before I do that, we have the great honor and privilege to listen to the Deputy Secretary General Policy from the Ministry of Transport, Yang Berusaha Puan Normah Osman, to share her ministry's point of view on low-carbon mobility and to set the tone for the following roundtable discussion. Thank you for your attention. Puan Normah, the floor is yours.
Assalamualaikum and a very good afternoon. Yang berbahagia Datuk Fazlur Rahman Zainuddin, Chief Strategy Ventures Officer of TNB. Yang berbahagia Datin Sri Sunita Rajakumar, Chairperson of Climate Governance Malaysia. Distinguished panelists, ladies and gentlemen. We have prepared some slides. I hope it can be shown on the screen. First of all, I'd like to congratulate the organizers of this event, CO Action Network and Climate Governance Malaysia, for organizing the second Energy Sector Roundtable engagement themed Low Carbon Mobility. It gives me a great honor to address this session on behalf of the Ministry of Transport Malaysia, given the importance of this agenda globally. I would also like to welcome all esteemed panelists and participants from both the public and private sectors. Today's roundtable discussion is a good platform for all participants to learn and share best practices and experiences on practical and innovative approaches towards low carbon mobility. I'm confident that the insights provided by the panelists and the participants in the course of this discussion will be useful in formulating strategies and action plans related to sustainable and green transportation options in Malaysia. Next slide, please. Ladies and gentlemen, transportation systems form the backbone of social growth and economic expansion of any country, including Malaysia. They play a vital role in linking states and regions and enabling fast and efficient movement of goods, services, and people. However, the transport sector admittedly is one of the biggest users of energy, of around 40% of the final energy, and contributes to about 30% of the greenhouse gas emission. Hence, given the critical role of the transport sector to national development, low carbon initiatives are given significant importance in transport planning. As you may know, one of the strategies outlined in 11 Malaysia Plan is to encourage low carbon mobility through the utilization of energy efficient vehicles and public transportation. In 2015, at the 21st Conference of Parties of United Nations Framework Convention of Climate Change, Malaysia has set a goal to reduce its greenhouse gases intensity of GDP by 45% by 2030 relative to year 2005. It is certainly a major endeavor for Malaysia to implement mitigation programs in order to achieve this target, considering a third of the emissions is from the transport sector and we only have 9 years to achieve this target. Thus, the government has adopted more initiatives to reduce carbon emission through our core policies. The National Transport Policy, launched in 2019, has embedded this as one of its 5 thrusts, namely Policy Thrust 4, Advance Towards Green Transport Ecosystem. In line with the Sustainable Development Goal 2030, this thrust will ensure that the transport system will be efficient, clean, and resilient with minimal impact to the environment and natural resources, while serving the purpose of providing efficient mobility to the nation. On parallel initiatives in the pipeline include the National Energy Policy by the Economic Planning Unit and the Low Carbon Mobility Blueprint by the Ministry of Environment and Water. The government will continue to devise policies and initiatives to utilize green technology in the transport sector, which will improve energy efficiency, reduce carbon emissions, as well as embed sustainability and green options in transport operations. Next slide, please. Ladies and gentlemen, the government's focus has always been on driving the shift from the usage of private vehicles to rail and public transport. While we will not be able to completely stop people from buying a car, we can influence their travel choices. Through means of regulation, infrastructure design, and providing alternative transport offering, we are certain that we can encourage our population to use alternative mode of transport, such as public transportation options, to get from one activity point to another. Mass transit would not only reduce emissions, but it will also reduce road congestion, a particular trait in urban areas such as Klang Valley. Hence, in recent years, the government is giving more attention to the rail transportation system and has approved a number of mega projects which will have a major impact on enhancing the economic development of the country. Just to name a few projects in the pipeline, these include MRT2. The Putrajaya line is expected to be fully operationalized by 2023, and the East Coast Rail Link, ECRL, is expected to commence by 2027. To complement our rail services, we have the public bus services, which is the backbone of the public transport system. In the Greater KL area alone, we have more than 1,500 buses in operation, which equals to about 20 buses per 100,000 population. This number is still, however, well short of our target to achieve of about 50 buses per 100,000 population as recommended by the World Bank. Therefore, moving forward to the next decade, our focus will be to introduce more buses. They are either battery powered or hybrid or fully electrified. Next slide, please. Ladies and gentlemen, electric vehicles represent a promising step towards lowering greenhouse gas emissions from the transportation sector. Car manufacturers such as Volvo have plans to only sell electric vehicles by 2030. In Norway, more than 70% of all cars sold in the country last year were electric ones. We need to ensure that our local car manufacturers too embrace this change so that we can have a localized base for the ecosystem. Nevertheless, at this point, driving an electric car in Malaysia can be challenging, given that we still lack the infrastructure that supports electric vehicles usage en masse. There are 421 charging points in the country as at March 2021, with targets to increase the amount to 125,000 by 2030. I am certain that with the launch of the policy on electric vehicle industry soon, Malaysia will scale up and spur the EV industry in the country. Similar to cars and other land transportations, aeroplanes emit carbon dioxide and other pollutants which contribute to global warming. In line with the recommendation of the International Civil Aviation Organization, ICAO, through the global market-based measures, Malaysia is committed towards addressing environmental challenges and sustainability. Recognizing the pressing need, Malaysia has pledged its undivided support to participate in the voluntary pilot phase of the carbon offsetting and reduction scheme for international aviation, short for CORSIA, and to fulfill the Sustainable Development Goals towards reducing carbon emission by 40%. As you know, Malaysia is one of the biggest palm oil producers. Being prudent and in order to ensure sustainability, we have introduced the Malaysian Sustainable Palm Oil MSPO certification scheme in 2013 in addressing the global concerns on the sustainable production of palm oil, including that of biodiversity loss, greenhouse gas emissions, and the destructions of wildlife habitats. However, we understand that according to the ICAO CORSIA eligible fuels document, crude palm oil does not meet the CORSIA sustainable criteria to qualify as CORSIA eligible fuels. In view of this, the Malaysian government is committed towards empowering research on biojet fuel as a resource for eligible fuels, in which 40 million has been allocated for sustainable fuel research grants during the Budget 2020 presentation. Thus, Malaysia aspires to see crude palm oil to be included as an acceptable feedstock in CORSIA in the future. Malaysia recognizes the importance of utilizing sustainable aviation fuel, or short for SAF, in reducing carbon emissions. However, the current market price of SAF is 3 times more expensive than the conventional fossil jet fuel and is not economically feasible to be implemented by aircraft operators. Hence, Malaysia would like to reiterate ICAO's Assembly Resolution A4080, which acknowledges the need for SAF to be developed and deployed in an economically feasible, socially and environmentally acceptable manner. The use of SAF will mainly be driven by CORSIA due to aircraft operators' ability to claim for emissions reduction from its offsetting obligations. However, Malaysia recognizes that the use of SAF also goes beyond CORSIA compliance and is important in supporting the aviation industry's global aspirational goal in environmental protection. On the maritime front, Malaysian ports have developed and implemented various green initiative programs, such as investing in more energy efficient and environmentally friendly cargo handling fleets, monitoring carbon emissions from port equipment and service and vehicles, and so on. In fact, Port Klang, our own Port Klang, was one of the 8 ports in the Asia-Pacific region that was awarded the APEC Port Services Network in 2020 for its impactful eco-friendly initiatives. Also, as part of the Malaysian government's commitment towards implementing the initial strategy on the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions from ships, Malaysia is voluntarily participating in the International Maritime Organization IMO Partnerships in Environmental Management for the Seas of East Asia project, in which Malaysia monitors greenhouse gas emissions by developing a baseline GHG emissions inventory for all vessels within Malaysian waters. And the second initiative, the YBhg Green Voyage 2050 initiative on port emissions monitoring program, which will entail developing a digital port emissions inventory to understand baseline emissions and monitor emission levels within port waters. Subsequently, emission reduction strategies are to be implemented, focusing on port call optimization systems to support just-in-time arrivals. Ladies and gentlemen, before I conclude my speech, I would like to highlight that the change that we need to partake may seem as additional costs to bear, but in the long term, we will find that it will actually be more cost-effective than before. And not only that, the primary focus of attaining a reduction in greenhouse gases with the ultimate target of carbon neutral will be attained, inshallah. With that, I would like to once again thank the organizers, CO Action Network and Climate Governance Malaysia, for keeping the conversation on this important topic active and alive. And I wish all of you a fruitful discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Puan Normah, for sharing with us what the Ministry of Transport has in mind for our country's low carbon mobility adoption. Indeed, I think it is quite clear that the pathway to low carbon mobility adoption in Malaysia is not a straightforward one, and one that would involve a lot of different players, different technologies, and different modalities, but ultimately something that will be beneficial for the nation in the long run. As such, Puan Normah's speech has set the stage for the roundtable discussion that we'll be having next. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, I am personally looking forward to hearing the thoughts of all our distinguished panelists this afternoon, who represent the key stakeholders on low carbon mobility in Malaysia. Now, a gentle reminder again that you can post your questions and input through the Q&A section on the WebEx client. And in order to maximize your experience, we would recommend that you switch to your view to grid view so that you can see all the panelists and all the moderator in action. So without further ado, let us welcome Engineer Ahmad Hadri Hadris of Shell Malaysia to moderate this roundtable discussion. Hadri, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Wikian. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and very good afternoon, everyone. First of all, thank you for joining, and thank you, TMB, for hosting this forum platform that we have. We do have a good panelist session together with us for today. I must congratulate TMB that it's not easy to bring all these prominent panelists we have together with us. Datuk Faz, yourself, representing TMB from the perspective of infra provider. We also have Datuk Aisha from MMA, representing from industries OEM perspective. We also have Datuk Madani from government, more towards auto industries policy. We have Encik Huzaimi, also from government agency, representing the perspective of climate change. And last but not least, we have Datuk Shahrul representing consumer side. So if you notice, it's a pretty good panelist. And just to set a scene in our forum discussions, and we do have limited time. Now, it was mentioned by our keynote speakers earlier that this is a series of roundtable discussions, and transport sector is one of the key contributor to greenhouse gas or carbon emissions. So this is a second one. We will have the third, fourth, and fifth, and at the end of that day, as Datin Sri Sunita mentioned, the CAN will put together all the feedback, discussions, recommendations from all these conversations as a recommendation to government. Now, why are we talking about transport sector for today? Now, we recognize that transport sector today in Malaysia is the second largest contributor of greenhouse gas, and I'm just recapping what was mentioned earlier. But importantly, is also the biggest energy consumer if you compare to the total energy consumption in Malaysia since 2013. Now, interestingly, transport sector also has a contributions to health. So when we talk about COVID situations today, while COVID is our primary focus, but in the longer term, as well as in the past, respiratory illness has been one of the contributions to human health issues, and that is mainly also contributed by the transport sector. Now, on the 6th of July, during the first roundtable conversations, Shell has actually launched the Tree, Sky and Sun as the Malaysia's pathway towards carbon neutral. And within that model and pathway, it talks about there's an important shift towards low carbon, and in particular towards electric vehicle or electrification of the transport sector. Now, when we talk about transport sector, for today's conversation, we're going to put aside the maritime and aviation. We're going to just focus more on the road transport in particular. And Puan Normah has also mentioned that road transport, model shift, public transportation is critical. But at the same time, there will also be private vehicle that we have to address on. Now, when we talk about electrification of road transport, this is fairly interesting subjects because you see everywhere in the world, a lot of parties are putting targets such as countries or cities trying to ban internal combustion engine. But interestingly also, way back in 1913, actually EV was first introduced by Thomas Edison. And that was back in 1913. That was like more than 100 years ago. And in 1971, the first manned vehicle is actually an EV in the moon. But yet today we don't see EV prevalent until today that we are seeing some countries are talking about it. So there are issues, particularly when we talk about Malaysia, and we like to go into that topic for today, not discounting the fact there are other elements such as biofuel, hydrogens into the mix, which we can also maybe touch. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to invite each of the panelists just to do a short remark, opening remark. Let's keep it succinct, keep it short, just for about 2 or 3 minutes. And if I may, I'd like to start with the government policy side. So perhaps can I invite Datuk Madani first and followed by Encik Uzaimi. Datuk Madani, just 2 to 3 minutes.
All right. Thank you. Can you guys hear me? Yeah.
Yes, we can.
Yeah. All right. Great. Yeah. Thank you, Adri. Thank you, TNB. Thank you, the organizer, for having me this afternoon. Yeah. Low carbon mobility. Yeah. Rightly said by Puan Normah earlier on, is something that the government is stressing, but also we need to now execute this low carbon mobility in a more aggressive manner, number one, and secondly, the implementation has got to be more comprehensive. It cannot be only angled from the manufacturer standpoint, but it has got to include other parameters such as energy policy, even the issues of overall sustainability, industrialization, the participation of technologists, companies coming into the supply chain, not only trying to be involved as a manufacturer of vehicles as well as parts and components, but also as supply chain to the system development as well as system integration. So I hope in our discussion today, we will be able to discuss this topic in a more comprehensive manner, understand all the parameters, the prioritized parameters that need to be made available, if not yet available, and to really put forth aggressive, strong policy. I would say policies that could be implemented in the next 6 months to 1 year. We obviously, many of the policies have got targets to achieve by the year 2030 and even 2040. That's fine. But it is my opinion that for the next 1 to 2 years, low-hanging fruits have got to be implemented. We need to allow the industry to come in more aggressively so that while policy is to facilitate, but industry have got to be given the platform and the window so that they could participate in a more, I would say, holistic and more aggressive manner. That would be my opening to this event, and that's what I hope that we could achieve at the end of this conference. Thank you, Adri.
Yep, thank you. Uzaimi, next.
Hi, everyone. My name is Uzaimi from the leading agency of CASA. They're looking into this green technology and also climate change. So we've been looking into this EV since way back. In fact, back in 2015, DCC had released the Electric Mobility Blueprint. And since then, we had learned a lot from what being stipulated in the EMB. What we found at the time, of course, the target for the EMB was not met because But then there are so many things that we had learned along the way. One of the things that we have learned is that we have to look into this EV on more holistic manner. So not only like trying to push EV on its own. In fact, we have to look at it on the bigger perspective on the overall transport sector. Hence, since 2018, we had looked into developing the low carbon mobility blueprint that look into the low carbon mobility as a whole. We found out that electric vehicles still one of the leading initiatives that can contribute into like the vehicle efficiency and also the emission reduction for the land transport sector. So as such, EV is being recognized as one of the four focus area and the low carbon mobility blueprint. In MGTC as well, we pushing for the charging infrastructure to support for the electric vehicles uptake in Malaysia. So with us, we have a Charge EV as the brand, and this is the brand that is recognized as the national EV charging infrastructure since the GTMP, Green Technology Master Plan was released last time. To date, we have about 400 charging points that is supporting the EV industry in Malaysia, but I can tell you guys that it's not enough. We have about 30,000 plug-in vehicles. About 90% of those is plug-in hybrid. That is probably the reason why the shortage of the EV charging infrastructure has not become such a huge issue unless when the BEV or full EV is going to come in. So this become like a very, very critical aspect to take care. So from there, based on that simple number, like the lowest ratio of the EV charger to the vehicles is about 30:1. So we should be looking to at least about 1,000 charging points today, just to cater to the market requirement today. But we only have about 400 from Charge EV, and then there will be like a few more coming from several other charge point operators. We are thankful that our Charge EV is being supported by many different organizations. We started with government support through YBhg funds, and then we had expand with collaboration with industry players. TMB also contributed quite a lot into this charging infrastructure. Sarawak Energy Berhad and a lot of other organizations. We hope that we can push for EV in more aggressive manner, like Datuk Marani mentioned, and we are very much aligned to that. Thank you.
Thank you, Zaimi. So we've heard both from the government perspective or agency perspective. So next, may I invite Datuk Aisha from industry's point of view, followed by Datuk Faz, and last Lee, followed by Datuk Sharul. Datuk Aisha, over to you, please. Can you unmute yourself using the screen? Okay, now we can hear. Yes.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you for inviting me for this discussion session. What we hope to achieve from this roundtable discussion is for both manufacturers and franchise holders. What we're hoping is the discussion will enable more customers to decide to buy EVs. And the most important for EVs to be saleable in Malaysia is for it to be affordable, and for the government policies to be very clear so that they know exactly what's going to happen in the future. And affordability is very, very important, as well as the infrastructure for the charging stations must be available so that it's easier for them if they want to charge their vehicles. Is available throughout Malaysia, and not only along the federal highways, but also in buildings, development, and all that. So this is why we are happy to participate, because we know the government is here with us, the policymakers are here with us, and they hear us. But what we want to know also is when is the actual EV policies will be implemented in Malaysia. We hear it's supposed to be soon, but we're still not sure. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Datuk Aisha. So Datuk Faz, you've heard Datuk Aisha also talk about infra, so keep it short, please.
But I think thank you very much, Hadri, and firstly, thank you very much for all the other panelists to join this conversation. I think it's a very good group of people. Hope to get interesting ideas. I won't say so much because I've already spoken earlier. I think what's important here is that hopefully today we can converge on why we're doing this. I think from our perspective, I think climate change action is actually one of the key things that drives this. But of course, there are many different drivers that others may have. So it's also interesting to actually get to a commonality in terms of why we're doing this. I mean, personally, I think, since infrastructure has been mentioned, and I think infrastructure is actually, if you look at user survey, I think it's amongst the top reasons of why the considerations of buying EVs or not buying EVs. Yeah, and as Tenaga, as an infrastructure player, yeah, we acknowledge that. But what's important here is that we believe that we cannot do it alone. Yeah, we need to work closely with players in the industry to match in terms of supply and demand. Yeah, so where the demand is, and where we can do the supply. So these are things that we would like to actually do more work. So we are opening the doors. Yeah, laying the carpet out for this collaborative effort to work with industry players. And I think also it's quite important, I think, to my mind, is that as we go about this discussion, what is our ambition level, yeah, in relation to how are we looking at in terms of electrification of mobility, particularly, let's say, for example, the conversion of ICEs to electric vehicles. I mean, we see a lot of emphasis on pace happening across different markets, different countries. We also see OEMs actually moving down that path, committing to certain phasing out of ICEs and moving to sales of EVs, etc. We also see within the Southeast Asia region, our neighboring countries also making certain commitments. So I think just want to understand, what is our collective ambition level, yeah, so that maybe if we can come together and make things happen. So with that, thank you very much, Hadri.
Yep. Thank you. Thank you. So, Dr. Sharul, the reason I put you last so that you can hear all these comments first or remarks, so that you can put together representing the owner's perspective. Over to you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. Firstly, thank you all for bringing the perspective of the users to this event. Just as a background, I started driving a full EV back in 2017, and we started this club, YBhg, back in 2019 to sort of help dispel the myths around EV ownership, and to actually also put together the voices of the users. Because we often see actually sometimes the policies and the setup, the discussions are done without any involvement from actual real life users. And I think that has been quite useful for us to actually interject ourselves in some of these discussions since we were set up back in 2019. I have to agree on most of the points that were brought up by most of the panelists around infrastructure, around clarity of our EV policies, around the especially incentives, given the fact that EVs are definitely more expensive to buy than their ICE equivalents. However, taking into account, of course, the maintenance and the energy use throughout the life of the vehicle, oftentimes it balances out. A lot of countries already have taken the path forward in terms of banning new ICE sales 2030, 2025, 2040 pun ada. And so it's just interesting to see where Malaysia is in that continuum, whether we are going to commit to a path, because that will be very helpful, not only to the users, of course, we can plan our purchases, but of course to the investors, the industry, because they also will be certain that whatever investments they make, because these investments are not small investments, battery plants, assembly plants, manufacturing plants, all cost big bucks, and they want to be sure that these are not going to be underutilized over the near future. And so to summarize, actually, before I hand it over, that we think that there needs to be very, very coordinated work and partnership between all the parties represented here. Dato' Aisha from the parties who are selling these vehicles. Datuk Madani, the policy maker, the regulator for the auto industry, Datuk Fazlur, the only provider of electrons in Malaysia today. Cik Zaimi also, of course, has been in this since 2015, 2016, and I'm driving an EV now thanks to this initiative from MGTC.
Yeah, thank you. So now, if you look at the history of EV in Malaysia, it's not relatively new. So way back in 1990s, Malaysia has already got involved through an entity called POYM. I don't know whether
Yes.
any of you have heard of this
That's a
before.
golf cart, bro.
Yes. Well, like Surya is supposed to be on the road too, right? And TMB actually had done some conversion, and around the year late 2010-ish, there's some money or funding, government funding was given to Proton to further develop, right? Now, that was a long time ago. Today is 2021. Where are we today? And Huzaimi mentioned about blueprint mentioned, and Dato' Aisha mentioned when is it, what is going to happen. So do we have that confidence that things will move forward? Now, can I ask this back to Dato' Sharo, this question?
That's $1 million question, and I think that so far the big impediment that we see, like at least from the user's perspective, and when we talk to all the different moving parts of the industry, is just the lack of clarity and the lack of leadership in terms of who is actually leading the charge and why are we doing this electrification. Today, at least the session is very clear that we are doing electrification of transport because GHG emissions from transport is big. In proportion to the rest, is the second biggest in Malaysia actually, other than energy generation, and land transport. 50% of that comes from petrol cars, so it's clear that that's the agenda. But when you talk about to other people, you talk about in other forums, then the question of whether this is an industry thrust that we should be putting in, and therefore we should invest like we did with Proton back in the 80s. It's all like very too many things going on. Nobody with cracking the whip in terms of saying that this is what we're going to do, this is the target, and also after setting the target to continuously monitor and get feedback. And that's one of the most disappointing things so far that we have seen over the past 1 or 2 years is the lack of data that outsiders such as ourselves, the users, can see in terms of the progress that's being made. For example, we don't even publish the carbon intensity of our grid. The last one was done by MGTC back in 2017, and after that, all zero, tak ada information. Information about numbers of BEV that's registered in Malaysia by JPJ. The last information that we have was from 2019, and now that data has disappeared from the government portal. It's like, apa hal ni? How can we do what we need to do to progress? Even the data itself is not available.
So, Dato' Aisha, I mean, by all means, any panelists, if you want to come in, just unmute yourself. Dato' Aisha, do you have anything to add? You mentioned about clarity and for the players to have a clear government policy so that you can plan forward. And you mentioned affordability. I would imagine from Dato' Sharo's point of view, we want to make sure it's affordable too, right? It is not like just a premium product. But how do we get there?
I would say just not necessarily affordable, but accessible, because of course there are different segments of EVs. There's two-wheelers even, and there's A, B, C, D, E. So I would not use the word affordable. I would use the word accessible for those who want it.
Okay, fair enough. Dato' Aisha?
Okay, thank you, Hadri. Basically, we support and welcome the government's initiative to achieve low carbon mobility. And in this case, in terms of EV vehicles, the step-by-step electrification of vehicles is essential, starting from hybrid vehicles and then HEV before transition to plug-in hybrids, electric PHEV and battery electric vehicles. The mass market acceptance will be driven by product pricing and convenience of high-powered locations. This is very important for TMB. We must make sure that if we buy EV vehicles, we will not, be stranded along the highways or anywhere in the country. So this must be very, very important for us. And And also users will accept a 30 minutes duration for charging. But if you have to wait for 5-6 hours before you be able to charge the EV vehicles, then forget it. You're not able to sell the vehicles, that's for sure. Yeah, and the density of charging structure, the locations must be significantly, especially in the urban locations throughout Malaysia, East and West Malaysia, as well as in Sabah and Sarawak. For the manufacturers, for us, what we would like to see is more incentives for CKD, zero import duty, zero excise duty, replacement. Equipments related to electric powertrains should also be exempted, as well as the issue of getting charge infrastructure off the high off cost. So we are hoping that TMB will reduce the cost for charging the EVs. High installation costs to connect, high cost of power compared to subsidies on petrol costs, and investors not willing to invest when EV vehicles are low in numbers. It's a chicken and egg situation, that's how I look at it. And very small margin on power deliveries to the customer. These are some of the issues that we feel must be solved and looked after before EVs will be really kick off in the market. And difficulties in getting charging properties, business owners to co-invest. Most wants the car manufacturers to pay for everything. Hardware, rent, power. These are the issues. That's what I'd like to highlight. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So I'll post this back to maybe Dato' Madani and Huzaimah both together, right?
Can I weigh in?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes,
I think your question was, are we realistic now to have EV finally on the Malaysian road, right? That was your question. We started with POEM, and then true, government has given some to Proton, but where were we? It seems that we haven't started any of those EV cars manufacturing in Malaysia, and that is the reality. So can we start it now? Look, the government way back in 2009, even before the NAP 2014, government started to incentivize EVs and hybrid then, giving zero excise duty, zero import duty. Yeah. But if you ask my opinion, I think it was too early. That year was too early. The question is the issues on EV. The panelists have spoken a lot of about variables, parameters that need to be enabled, infrastructures that need to be enabled, and these are things. Dato' Aisha mentioned chicken egg. True, it is a chicken egg situation, but the more the public realize the importance of having low carbon mobility, number one, and the more government really put forth a policy that is going to enable, the implementation of EVs on the road. The more and more all of these are being appreciated across the stakeholders, it's actually easier to put forth a policy that is implementable. And I think this time around, not only the government has more appreciation on low carbon mobility now, but the industry players are more ready, I think, to come in. We have discussed with a few other OEMs. They have got products, they have got services ready to be deployed. They have got good products that can go for 400-500 kilometers per charge. They have got technologies that are able to do rapid charging, as mentioned, below the 30 minutes timeline. And on top of that, we have got now YBhg, for example, Datuk Sharul. Datuk Sharul and his members in YBhg, there's a consumer NGO, very enthusiastic about the introduction of EVs in Malaysia. We have never got this back in 2009 or even 2015. All of that are now coming into play. Now, with all this push and the appreciation coming across all the stakeholders, that is why I believe now is the right time. In my beginning, in my introduction, I said, the EV policy that I talk about that is going to be approved, I hope soon by the government, and has got to be implemented really in the next 1 to 2 years. And early on, I said even 6 months to 1 year. Why? Because I think if Malaysia is able to implement this good policy, in the next 6 months to 1 year will be moving ahead. Because when I talk with consumers, when I talk with the OEMs, when I talk with other stakeholders whom are interested to come into EV, they are now ready. But they really want to hear that final policy. One thing is policy coming from the government, so that it is clear, it is everything will be on the same footing. I would say the level playing field are being put forth properly. People understand how do they come in, what they get, how they are going to execute their projects. So all of these, in my opinion, is very clear in the upcoming policy. I'm just hoping that these policies could be approved very soon, and then it could then be implemented as we know the stakeholders are ready. Way back in 2009, we don't have any OEM who wants to do EV in Malaysia. And on top of that, we put conditions like, you should do CKD, but you can bring CBU and there's a bridging quantity. While that is still true now, but there's a high level of flexibility in terms of bringing in CBU to enable. You see, OEMs, for them to bring CKD, it has got to make sense in terms of the economies of scale. And before they can do that, they need to bring in CBU. So policies have got to be flexible to allow CBU, and these CBUs have got to be also competitive, or else, the moment CBUs are not competitive, there's no CKD operation, and this is where the chicken egg situation will start. So in the EV accelerated policy or in the EV policy that is, I hope, soon to be approved by the government, it's something that enable, CBU, but, there's a way to enable CBU so that can be transformed into a CKD. We know for CKD to happen, there's a need for economies of scale. But of course, it's not only about incentivizing the vehicles, but it is also about incentivizing the consumers. It is also about incentivizing, the other providers like TNB, having smart metering, enabling consumers to upgrade from 1 phase to 3 phase, enabling the Ministry of Housing. We need to bring in policy to allow charging stations to be installed in all flats, all condominiums. All of this have got to be enabled. So I think now there is this appreciation, there is this willpower, I would say, because when I discuss across ministries now, there is this zest. I call it this zest across all ministries that want to do this now. So I think this is the right time. All of us have got to move now very fast and move at one time together this time around.
Yeah, there's a lot of questions in the.
Can I just make a comment on what Datuk Madani has said?
Mm-hmm.
The only request from the industry players is the policy that is implemented must be long term. Like the last time when they implemented on the CBU, the incentives is for 1 or 2 years. After that is removed, and we are really caught unguarded. And this is where the implementation for the EV policies must be long term, so that people have confidence to introduce the EV vehicles in Malaysia. That's a comment.
Yeah, it is long term, Dato' Aisha. It is until 2030 minimum. Yeah. And
you will mention that, Dato' Madani, up to 2030 in the policy.
Mm-hmm.
All right. I believe all of this has been discussed in preparing that policy earlier, right? So, Huzaimi,
I can concur that one.
Yes. But is that the right time? I mean, we're having COVID situation today. I see one of the questions in that chat box is, we have COVID. Is that, are we misaligning our priorities for now? Or how can this EV ecosystem can actually help the whole SMEs, industry simulations to grow beyond COVID pandemic?
I believe it's a new industry for us to kick off, and based on the the driving pattern or the behavior, EV will fit very good in terms of addressing this COVID. So probably it's along the way you might need to spend more time isolating yourself in the car, and then EV probably is the best way for you to do that, because you're idling inside the car and then you're not polluting the surrounding environment.
Thank you. Yeah. So in the the sky, the sun scenario that was launched by the ministers 2 weeks ago, it puts certain perspective for the transport sector to decarbonize. So it says the focus towards low carbon mobility needs to start now. it needs to achieve before 2030 or at least by 2020 for the EV market to thrive in Malaysia, so that by the year 2050, at least 50% of road transport is electrified. And now it includes public transport, it includes passenger private vehicle too. Now, the discussion, the comment that I mentioned just now is that we talk about policy or to be introduced. Now, the first question is when? That was asked earlier. Of course, Dr. Madani and Encik Uzaimi alluded to it. But is it long-term enough to 2030? Right? What do we need to do more? Because Dato' Shahrul talked about data needs to be made available. So otherwise, are we repeating the same, perhaps, shortcomings that we've done in the past, regardless whether the industry is ready or not today? So maybe Uzaimi and Dato' Madani can add, and Dato' Faz on the infra or anything else you want to add.
Shall I address some of it on the infra side? Because I think
Yes, please.
Dato' Aisha put me on the spot, so I have to answer that. So anyway, no, I think it's very much correct. Like in terms of infrastructure, is very important. Yeah, I think that's fundamental to our business. So we tend to we understand this very well. Yeah, economic development without infrastructure, nothing happens. Yeah? So we understand this. I think the question that was mentioned earlier is a chicken and egg situation. You know, the demand and the supply, right? So is that available? And of course, to be fair, I think from industry in terms of number of vehicles still pretty much low, kan? So we talk about in terms EVs, about 30,000 EVs, battery EVs, about 300,000. And most of it is actually 90% of it is actually plug-in hybrid EVs, and people buy plug-in hybrid EVs because good tax incentives lah, and it's like a normal car, yeah, the normal car. So whilst we have some charging station, charging points, etc., but yeah, the utilization is about 20%. So it's something that we have got to learn. Yeah, I think why is that the case? So to me, I think as we look at the pathway. To Hadri's point earlier, are we ready to get there? Yeah, I think the signposts seem to be pointing that direction, right? I think the signposts saying that now we see greater commitment to climate change. Yeah, I think you've seen many nations stepping up the climate commitments. That's one signpost. We also see the automotive manufacturers also stepping up their commitments in relation to phase out of ICEs, yeah? And you see some in the 2030s or even earlier and 2040s. Yeah? So these are things are happening, right? So signposts indicates that things are moving in that direction, and I think all you have to do is now we have to come together, because I think each of us will have different perspectives, yeah, to this. Okay? So for us, like Tenaga, we're waiting. Where's the demand? Where are the vehicles, right? So I think, but as Tenaga, we're not standing still either. So given the learning from our 73 charging points and 20% utilization, we've kind of like shifted now to look at talking to fleet owners and fleet operators, as well as we want to talk to OEM manufacturers, right? So fleet owners and fleet operators, recently we signed the MOU with DHL. DHL has a net zero emissions plan and one of it is actually converting their fleet to electric. Yeah. So with that, we can understand a bit more on the demand side. What's their pace? Yeah? So this another focus that we're doing. So working more with fleet operators, with OEMs. I said also quite important. Looking at the TIV of the country, I know about 500 to 600,000 vehicles. I think 26% of that. We've seen automotive manufacturers with some form of ICE phase-out commitment, so it's increasing. Although the top four manufacturers, Produa, Proton, Honda, and Toyota, will still very much still need to have some direction on that side. But we want to talk to them. Yeah. In fact, we would like to talk to some of the national manufacturers to actually understand where their game plan is. But again, ultimately, direction of the country. What is it that we want? And I think I'm very, very excited to wait for the low carbon mobility blueprint and to understand directionally where we're heading. 2030, yeah, okay, fine. But I think we need to look at even beyond that. It is something which requires significant investment, and we need to understand that investment, where is it heading? So I think on infrastructure side, we're okay. We want to talk to people. Yeah, we're willing to do that. Yeah, but we have to come together lah. One party cannot do on its own.
So before I pass this to Dr. Marani Huzaimi to answer, so just bring back, Dr. Faz mentioned that we want to provide the infra, but we want to see how the market react to it. Dr. Aisha said, oh, we want to supply into the market, but we need clarity in terms of policy. And then Dr. Shahrul's club is waiting to purchase, right? And I believe there are other people out there where. So it boils down back to what we're talking about, this low carbon mobility, the policy that you say that, oh, it's going to come, but is it going to be really as per public's expectation? When is it going to come out? And how would it be encompassing, addressing all these different perspective that we have in light of this current COVID situation as well? So maybe Huzaimi first, and then maybe Datuk Madani.
Yeah, I think in the sense of the customer or the end user is ready to adopt this. I think we have heard this in many different platforms. It's just that today the accessibility, as correctly mentioned by Datuk Shahrul, accessibility to the EV is just not enough. So we only have like a handful model that is available on the market today, and it's probably only one model that is below 200,000 ringgit. And then this model, when it compare the similar model, it compared to the rest of the world that being sold, this is among like the top tier in terms of the pricing. It's one of the most expensive countries that you can buy that model in the world. So there's something that is not really right in that equation over there. Every time that we run surveys, people are ready. The technology acceptance is there. Based on like the latest report, even for the EV today, back in 2015, maybe the average of the EV is about 200 kilometers per charge on any DC cycle. Now it's at 350. And then the prices, if you look at the Nissan Leaf, for instance, this is the same. Mm-hmm. So what it means is like the technology or the betterment of the vehicles had it up to the cost, to the price. So the price stayed the same, but the car got better. Moving forward, we hope that this 350 kilometer per charge is kind of like the magic number, where the effect of the price will start to be shown. And then you're talking about the long term. This is not, to us, it's probably, it does not really necessary for us to really think what is beyond 2030 that date, because we are also expecting the price parity to happen for the EV. So for the middle segment, maybe 2025, 2026, the price parity will achieve. And with the growth of the EV today, it's probably going to be earlier. 2030, maybe it's a price parity for the lower segment. So we did a bit of analysis on it's not affordability, right? Because the Malaysian is buying the car on all price spectrum.
Yeah.
So about 50% of the vehicles in Malaysia, 52% is 70,000 ringgit and below. So if you can put the price at that, then you capture like the whole market already. But if you look into like the higher segment, even like 200,000 ringgit vehicles and beyond, the market size is still 5% of the TIV. And then for 100,000 ringgit vehicles and above, the total market size is about 28%. So this is how we see is about how this price shifting that we want to tie it up with this policy intervention. How is that going to happen? So you try to push the right segment of the vehicle from like a right quadrant to the left quadrant in terms of the pricing and capture more market along the way. But nevertheless, LCMB not really expecting like a too aggressive. But while we are doing the study, there's a lot of like different kind of feedback, and there's a lot of like nerve on putting such a big number. So in LCMB, if the plan is to put about only 15%, 15% at 2030 out of the TIV, and the TIV for the 2030 suspected to be then more than 1 million cars at the time. So you're looking at about 15% of that. So right now, after we're seeing like Indonesia is coming up with a much more aggressive statements, right? 2025 looking at 20% market already with BEV. So maybe along the way we have to make an adjustment. Maybe we have to even like strengthen the policy direction that we have.
Can I just ask a bit, what about two-wheelers? Because that gives a different segment of market as well. Is that being addressed, and how do you see?
Yeah, right now the two-wheelers lack a lot of like standards. Unlike the passenger vehicles, where a lot of standards is being very much matured. So in fact, under our technical committee, under the IAC group, so we ISC group, the Jabatan Standard, we are adopting about 10 standards for this year to make it compulsory on the EV vehicles. But then for the motorcycle, there's pretty much lacking. The charging standard has not been there. Nevertheless, the volume for motorcycle and car in Malaysia is about the same. It's about 500,000-600,000 a year. But then the driving behavior is something that we are looking at the moment. Typically in Malaysia, if you just bring back in the time, you see like the motorcycle in Malaysia, every year they increase the performance, and so become faster and faster, the CC become bigger, so become the selling point of the motorcycle. EV, electric motorcycle, is kind of like reset that tone a bit, because now to balance the battery, so the compromise is maybe on the power and also on the range. But on this electric motorcycle, we are looking at two things. One is the battery swapping system, on how to actually standardize that or get the workable swapping system in Malaysia for motorcycle, and also addressing this growing e-commerce market for the food delivery and light delivery system. So we are looking into this tool for the electric motorcycle.
So Datuk Madani, if the key that was, yep, go ahead.
Yeah, look, Huzaimi, there is this low carbon policy you guys are doing, right? And I know inside that low carbon policy, you make reference to the MITI EV policy, yeah? The MITI EV policy, I mean, I think this is something that people maybe need to understand. There is this low carbon policy, which is encompassing a lot more than just mobility, a lot more than just cars, motorcycles, and transportation. It is really the entirety of low carbon. So there's one big policy. Under that policy, there is a reference to mobility, which is now the EV policy that MITI is drafting and trying to get the approval from the government. Now, I can talk about EV specific, but not the overall low carbon ecosystem. Now, so under this EV policy, as I mentioned, I've mentioned a lot to some of the associations, even to YBhg. Perhaps today I can also say a little bit about the EV policy that I said I'm hoping for it to be approved by the government soon. It touches several areas. Like, number one, it touches the areas of direct taxes, or we should call it indirect. Sorry, we call it indirect taxes, like excise duty, import duties. These are indirect taxes to the product. Yeah. So there's that angle. So this is an angle whereby big reduction of I would say really a great reduction of excise duty as well as import duties to EV. Okay, that's one. The other one is this reduction of duties not only for CKD, but it will start with the CBU. Okay, so as I've mentioned earlier, to enable CKD, we need to bring in CBU, and CBU will then, the OEMs will then try to understand whether this CBU is marketable, and then when there's economies of scale, then they'll go into the CKD operation. But the actual thing is, policy has got to enable this. For example, the reduction of excise duty, the reduction of import duties. Despite the fact that these cars are CBU, we are still recommending for these CBUs to be incentivized. then only the prices can come down, then only people will buy, then only there's economies of scale, then there's only all this supply chain ecosystem of EV charging and so on and so forth will come in. Then only the CKD operation will make sense. So for that reason, this entire excise duty, import duty, or should I say this duty reduction or incentives on this has got to be prolonged to a time period that can enable all of this CBU to CKD to kickstart. Now, of course, we need to understand, not all models will be transformed into a CKD operation. I mean, models that are high-end, for example, it may not be viable for them to do CKD. So probably they will still remain with CBU. Now, for that reason, the ecosystem of EV is just not about the assembly or the manufacturing of vehicles. There are other aspects of EV that can spin off economy in the country. And therefore, the policy is also looking, I'm talking about the EV policy, is also looking into if you can't do if you can't do CKD because of low volume, but you still want to bring in your cars because there's still small quantities of people wanting to buy it in form of CBU, then maybe you can propose to government to bring in other spin-offs to the economy that spin-off will enable you to enjoy these incentives, despite the fact that you are not going to do CKD operation. Yeah, but really the mass-produced EV cars, we believe with the economies of scale, it can be in the form of a CKD. Now, earlier on, I was talking also about consumer. Yeah. Now, consumer, apart from incentivizing the charging station at home, there is also the aspects of tax. Yeah, that's something that is yet to be finalized. To be honest, I'm not sure whether this will be approved or not, but that's something that we also recommending. People buying EVs, they should be incentivized in form of some form of direct tax to the consumer, to the buyer. Yeah, that's something that is yet to be finalized, and for this reason, I think this one area of the EV that's got to be quickly finalized by the government, so that something that the government can announce, and then the OEM can start to come in and roll in their EV plans. I'd like to touch on one thing. Yeah. The charging stations, yeah, or the other infrastructure that comes in with EV charging is definitely one of them. We have got TNB as really the supplier of power, but I would like to make it clear that in terms of the charging stations, that is open up to everybody. Okay, really at the front end, policy opens it up to all players, whoever wants to come in and contribute or install this charging station, and with a business model that is viable for them. And of course, incentives are also being recommended, for such ecosystem to be for such businesses to be made available in the country. I also like to touch on the fact that even R&D, in this coming policy, the R&D aspect of EV ecosystem, OEMs or anybody for that matter, I mean OEMs, industry players, business entrepreneurs, they also include R&D into their activities. I know some people may say that it's too small to do R&D, but this policy is an all-encompassing policy. While many OEMs may not want to do R&D in Malaysia, that's fine, but there are other players who wants to do R&D and contribute this R&D into as part of the bigger picture of what the OEM wants to do, or even R&D in the areas of batteries, R&D in the areas of charging, putting in IoT into the charging infrastructure. These are small R&Ds, not big R&D, but some who wants to do big R&D are also welcome, but what I'm saying is part of the ecosystem is people doing R&D along the ecosystem of EV are also being recommended for them to receive incentives. Now, Huzaimi mentioned about standards, very true. So the NAP, actually this is not inside our EV policy, because it has been already recommended in the NAP 2020. There are already 11 standards being developed and actually already completed for EVs. These are all standards harmonizing our standards to the UN regulation. So as far as standards are concerned, we are there already, to allow the deployment of EVs in the country. So I thought the reason I'm saying this is because we keep on harping, and I understand why. people need clarity of policy. They need to understand whether it is in the next 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, So as I've mentioned earlier, I think all stakeholders, TMB, for example, has been coming over and we've been meeting, we've been discussing about even pilot projects, even other leasing sharing companies. They've been coming to MITI and they're also proposing for EV sharing and so on and so forth. So all of these are already in the discussion, and some OEMs are already coming in wanting to start production of the EVs in the country. Of course, they will start with CBU, then they will go into CKD. So what I'm saying is, never had we been discussing on EV with many stakeholders at the rate that we are doing it today. Even though it's EMCO and MCO, for that reason, really at MITI level, to be honest, we've been working day and night, every day, honestly, until really late evening, because there are so many discussions coming in, apart from, of course, trying to open up the economy, of which it's really a very challenging thing to do right now. But we are still, really trying hard to open up the economy across all sectors. But at the same time, all these parallel sessions about EV, other aspects of what MITI investment trades are still going on, as other countries are still pursuing their trade and investment policies. Yeah. So that's what I want to say.
Yep.
Add on to what Huzaimi has mentioned. Thank you.
Thank you. We are into injury time. Actually, we are 2 minutes out.
Can I clear some?
Hold on,
just a little bit?
Just a second. I'll give you opportunity. I need to close it.
I think for the
just
policy
hold on.
that we're looking.
Hold on, Huzaimi. Just a second. So what we're going to do is that we're going to give everyone a chance to wrap it and close it. And Huzaimi, you can do it during that time. I will ask a questions, and then you do the opportunity within a minute, please, because we are in the injury time. So I will go around. We're starting with Dato' Sharul. Now, with all this, you've heard that, well, we have policies. Seems the plan is great. We are going to get there. What else is missing? In just 1 minute.
Well, I think that it sounds like everybody is keen. Everybody has the sort of roughly the right idea. So I think the cornerstone is just get moving. Just get it done. Announce it. Everybody knows what's going on. And please don't bother getting it 100% right. We can adjust it along the way. Once we are doing this, there needs to be some sort of steering committee that monitors the progress, maybe every quarter or every half year or something. Then we can figure out actually what are the things that we didn't do so well can improve. What are the things that we did well that needs to be expanded. But waiting for the thing to be perfect before we roll it out, and that's why we are being left behind by everybody, and we are emitting tons of carbon into the atmosphere while we dither.
Yep, thank you. Dato' Aisha, on your side, you've heard everything. So what else is needed from your side?
I think we've heard from all. It's good to know exactly what's the progress, especially in terms of government policies. What is missing is the final announcement. When exactly it's going to be announced? Because we hear it's going to be announced, and all OEMs in Malaysia, we have products that we want to bring in for EVs that we can start immediately, but we want to know what's the final policy. And as I always said, it has to be long-term, which Datuk Madani has said is until 2030. So that's good. That's all.
Thank you. And as a first from TMB point of view, at least you have decarbonized your power generation side. It's moving along. So we know at least electricity is cleaner to charge the EV. But what else is required from your side to move this further today?
I think I pretty much echo what the other panelists are talking about. Because what is missing is actually a common view of what we want to achieve as a country. I think that's the key thing, because it sounds like we all seem to be discussing about the same thing today. But how do we bring that and converge and actually say that, okay, yes, this is what Malaysia wants, this is what we want. And I think that's the key thing. So that's what's missing. We need to bring everybody together and tie them into one position for the country.
Yeah. Okay. I will invite Datuk Madani. So my questions to you will be, you've heard all this. The key questions will be, who's actually responsible in government? Which ministries is it?
Yeah, as far as the industry is concerned, it's MITI. So the EV policy, it is under MITI. So MITI, work together with all the stakeholders across its agencies as well as the other stakeholders in drafting this EV policy that I've talked about. And MITI is also, they have discussed it across all ministries as well. So MITI is the one that will be bringing it to the government for the final endorsement by the government.
Thank you. And Encik Uzaimi, a final chance for you to wrap it up together. And are we really going to see this low carbon mobility? And are we going to really going to get there in terms of decarbonizing the transport sector?
So we believe with the LCMD, we can decarbonize the transport sector. Just to correct a bit on the Madani earlier, the policy is looking at the land transport. So within the land transport, we are not only looking for the EV, but it's also another thing yang missing on this discussion that we have, which is the emission consideration in vehicles registration. Right now, it's not Malaysia compared to neighboring country. We do not really consider the emission fully. So that is one of the things that we want to address in the LCMD that will be complementing the EV initiative as well. Yeah, so on that, I think Dato' Aisha, especially the group is quite anxious waiting for it. So the document is at the final level. We have circulated the so-called, and then we start to receive this ulasan, and then next is to prepare for the cabinet presentation. But we have presented at the national level in the Economic Action Council and National Climate Action Council back in April, and it was accepted.
All right. Yeah, there's a lot of, thank you, Zai. There's a lot of questions in the questions box. I know it's impossible to address all your questions. Some of it, in fact, has been answered by Dr. Sharul, but Dr. Sharul, the audience cannot see your answer, actually, but we'll figure out a way, TMB will figure out a way to for you to be able to answer them.
I see, man.
Yes.
So I spent all this time typing.
Yes. Unfortunately, we don't have time. I must say that we could have used a lot more time to have a deeper conversation. Unfortunately, we don't. But importantly, at least we've managed to address some of the elephant in the room. Hopefully, through CAN and CGM, be able to take out some of the input discussion perspective into the recommendations. And with that, I would like to thank to all the panelists. Thank you very much for your valuable time and input, and also being candid about your views to it. And again, this is a safe space because in the spirit of progressing collectively together to make it happen. So with that, thank you very much, and back to you, Weekend.
All right. A very big hand to Hadri and all our distinguished panelists today. I think, the conversation that flowed forth from today's discussion was truly something that I really enjoyed personally, and I believe that that one key takeaway that I can listen from what was being mentioned by all the great our panelists this afternoon is that clearly it appears that the stars are all aligned for EV adoption to take off in Malaysia, and what is actually needed at the end of the day is clear policies, clear partnerships, and also the participation of all both public and also private sector in order to move it forward. So on that note, ladies and gentlemen, just to point out as well, for the Q&A, unfortunately, we couldn't take all the questions this afternoon, but rest assured that the answers that Dr. Sharul has so diligently typed into the boxes are being noted by and can be read by the participants and the audience out there. So, but rest assured, we will compile all the questions that has been given. And we will forward it to the panelists at a later date. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, before we end, let us run a quick poll to gauge whether you think electric vehicle adoption is key to any low carbon mobility strategy in Malaysia. So this is just very short poll just to gauge what you think. Is it time for EV to take off in Malaysia? Is it important for us? Okay. Let's know your thoughts on this. So while we are waiting for the poll results, do be reminded that the third roundtable engagement will be happening 2 weeks from now, on the 3rd of August, on the topic of renewables and electrification, which is probably another equally fascinating topic to explore. And as such, do join us again in the upcoming roundtable engagement. All right. So let's have a quick look at the poll results. So do you believe that electric vehicle adoption is key? Let's see. I think everyone is waiting with bated breath for the outcome to come up. There you go. So it appears that the majority of us believe that low EV is something that is crucial for low carbon mobility in Malaysia, and that's great. So that clearly shows that the audience here is on a similar wavelength with the panelists. Electric vehicle needs to take off, and we hope that this happens sooner rather than later. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, we have reached the end of our session today. Once again, thank you very much to all the panelists. Thank you to all the audience here. Now, please help us to improve by completing a short survey as provided by the QR code on the screen. And with that, do stay safe and take care. Goodbye, everyone. Thank you.